Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Blu-Ray Boutique. I'm your co-host, Tim Rosenberger.
And I'm your co-host, Rosalie Lewis.
And today we're going to be celebrating our 3rd year anniversary. And Yay! And for those of you who have been with us for a while know that we use this time to talk about David Lynch-related projects, movies, and television stuff. Last year, as you may remember, we talked about the first 2 seasons of Twin Peaks, along with the film Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. Today, we're going to be talking about Twin Peaks The Missing Pieces and Twin Peaks The Return. Twin Peaks The Return is basically, essentially, a 3rd season of the show that instead of being done at CBS, was done at Showtime, was 18 episode limited series done. Was released, that was filmed in 2015 to 2016 and was released in mid 2017. And then Twin Peaks The Missing Pieces, for those who don't know, is essentially around 90 minutes of deleted and extended scenes from Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. That is available on, I know at least the Criterion release of Fire Walk with Me. And we're talking about The Missing Pieces, even though it's not really a movie, it's not really a show. We're talking about that for, well, I guess a couple reasons. One is because Twin Peaks The Return is not actually part of a boutique label, so we have to include something somehow to make this somewhat eligible. And 2, Twin Peaks The Missing Pieces is kind of, well we'll get into partially how it's constructed, I guess, in a little bit. But it is technically, like, you can log it on Letterboxd, so it's kind of a film thing, sort of. But why don't we get into The Missing Pieces? So, like I said, this is essentially, I mean, to be cynical about it, it's kind of like a glorified deleted scene, feature-length deleted scenes extended scene thing. I will say, this is probably, and this is all, again, from the movie, stuff that was deleted from the movie, around 90 minutes. The movie, I think, was around like 210 or so. Something like that, 210, 215. And this is like 90 minutes of material that David Lynch cut. I don't know if this is everything that he filmed or not. If there's still stuff that he hasn't released to the public, I'm sure there is. I will say this is probably the most beautifully presented deleted scenes, extended scene thing I've ever seen on any sort of movie. It almost starts kind of like a movie within itself, with like a title card and some music and stuff, and actually have sometimes transitions, and they really kind of construct it very nicely. The lead scenes are all in chronological order, so from the beginning of the film down to the end of the film. And it's an interesting kind of experience watching it. It's almost, again, kind of like a companion film within itself to the Fire Walk with Me movie. And it's interesting watching it because it's almost like you're watching a movie, but you're getting like almost little to none of the context,
right,
of what's going on, because all the major stuff is not there. But a lot of this is just little moments at the beginning with the FBI agents, some extra stuff with Dale, and then a lot of stuff obviously with Cheryl Lee's Laurel Palmer. And then the biggest thing that fans of the show would be interested in is that the deleted scenes, because the movie featured, in terms of people from the show, it featured Kyle MacLachlan, David Lynch, Miguel Ferreira, Cheryl Lee, obviously, the actress who played the log lady, whose name I'm forgetting at the moment, but I'll have to look up later. And then maybe 1 or 2 other people from the show. But basically, most of the people, they were regulars on the show, were not in the movie. But almost all of them filmed scenes from the movie that were cut. So you do get a little bit more extra stuff with them, which is nice. But how did you kind of feel about watching this material? Did you like it? Did you like kind of the presentation of it and all that?
Yeah, it's well put together. I don't think it would have and I don't think it's meant to, but I don't think it would have made much sense
Mm.
if you hadn't already seen Fire Walk with Me.
Oh, no.
But it was an interesting kind of alternate reality version. I mean, a lot of the story beats maybe are the same, but we're seeing it from different angles or different characters' perspectives, and just getting little additional vignettes that set us in that time, in that place. And I feel like it answered a couple of questions that the movie and the show hadn't answered at that point. So one in particular being towards the end, so I won't kind of explain what it is, but there was one thing that I was like, oh, okay, so they are going to explicitly explain this. But one of the things that I think I was the most excited about was that there's so much more David Bowie, because David Bowie, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, Firewalk with Me, he only had like one scene, and in this he gets several scenes, and they're a little bit longer, and they're set in different places. And so his character, who of course, is also featured in The Return, although David Bowie himself, of course, had passed at that point, I believe, but he gets a little more screen time, and we get a little more backstory, and I liked that, because that always felt like a missed opportunity to me. So I was really excited about that. And in addition to that, my biggest takeaway from Twin Peaks: The Missing Pieces is when Laura Palmer says,
"No, you're the muffin."
Because what better way to sum up Donna's character? So that was my big takeaway.
Yeah, that was a cute little extra scene, because then at the end of that, when she's walking away, like she's walking back off the street away from Donna's house, and she's kind of crying a little bit, and she's like,
"No, Donna, you're right. I'm the muffin."
Yeah.
Goes off. That was really cute. I saw one person say that they thought would be, a great addition is all stuff that's worthy of being in the movie, that in the actual cut of the movie and stuff. I would disagree with that.
Mm-hmm.
There's stuff I like in this, but there's also a lot of the stuff, I don't know if it's most of it, but a lot of the stuff I can see why it was cut. Primarily the stuff with the Twin Peaks regulars that were not in the final cut of the movie. A lot of that stuff, I honestly don't know why David Lynch wrote and filmed it, because I would think it'd be very obvious that this is never going to make it into the movie, because it has nothing to do with the story of the movie. If it had been,
but I think he's hanging out with his friends. You know what I mean? Like, I think some of it is just him writing little scenes for people he knows and he enjoys working with.
I know, but then it's like, I don't know, because then you have more of a heartbreak of, then you have to break that to them later that, oh, hey, we cut you from the movie. So it's almost worse than if you just told them beforehand, hey, I'm making this movie. There's not really a place for you guys in it, but, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it's like one of those things where I think if it had been like a prequel episode or two, like a prequel two-parter of the actual show, it would be fine. But there is some, I think, nice stuff in there. Like you said, the muffin moment is really cute. I would have been fine if that would have been in the final cut. And then there's one moment that I actually really like, and some of these moments it's hard because I haven't watched Fire Walk with Me since I watched it for the episode we did last year. So some of the stuff, I don't remember all of the context of it, so I can't quite remember if maybe a scene that I liked by itself would work in the film as a whole, or if it would disrupt the mood, or just slow down the pacing, or just wouldn't work within the body of the film. But one scene I liked a lot was there was a dinner scene, which is in the film, but there's an extra little bit where it's a dinner scene with Laura and her parents. And I guess at the beginning of the scene, when her dad enters, he talks about the, I think, Norwegian summit, which happens at the beginning of the show and stuff. And he starts trying to teach them how to say, Laura and her mom, Sarah, how to say, I think, hello, my name is Laura, or my name is Sarah, or whatever, in Norwegian.
Now, Sarah, you first. Hyggelig og måtte dem.
What? Hyggelig
Og måtte dem.
og måtte dem.
Jeg heter
Jag heter
Little
Sarah. Sarah Palmer.
Okay, honey, now. That's very good. We'll practice some more. You try it, okay? Hyggelig og måtte dem.
Hyggelig og måtte dem.
Jeg heter
Jeg heter Laura Palmer.
Okay, all together now.
Oh,
Hold hands. A little bow, a little formal bow. Hyggelig å møte dem. Jeg heter Leland Palmer.
Sarah Palmer.
Hyggelig å møte dem. 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 That's my girls. That's my girls.
And that scene I actually really liked because it showed, while this family is kind of fractured in a lot of ways, it showed a nice moment, and you could see why, Laura doesn't have necessarily the best relationship with her parents, but it's them. You could see why she still loves them and cares about them and would want to have a better relationship with them. And yeah, it's a nice moment of when most of the scenes in the movie with her and her parents are pretty, dramatic and serious and dark and stuff. This was this happy moment that you could see where, kind of what is being lost with her death and her loss and all that stuff. When I was sad that was not in the film.
Yeah, I will say there were some lighter moments in this that would have lifted the mood in Fire Walk with Me, because that movie is overall pretty heavy, and maybe that's partly why they were cut, because it didn't really fit with the rest of the tone. But it was nice seeing those little bits and pieces here, and overall I felt like watching this, especially so far removed from having seen Fire Walk with Me, and I also watched it out of sequence because I watched the show first and then I watched this, which I realize now was stupid, but it's okay. I still got stuff out of it. I just, But it felt more dreamlike because it's just all these little fragments, and in a way that's sort of fitting.
Well, and I think for me anyway, because I watched it in order, like you should. No, no, I watched the missing pieces and then I watched The Return. What was kind of nice about it was it kind of eased me back into the universe a little bit. And yeah, there's some extended stuff in the Black Lodge, which was interesting. I don't remember how much of it in a truncated form was in the movie, but I think it was nice to be reminded of certain things and certain phrases and certain lines that I think continued to be significant, that were in the original show and continued to be significant in The Return. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. I would suggest, if you're a Twin Peaks fan, to watch it.
Absolutely. I think it's worth seeing, and it'll just kind of fill in some of the blanks, or, fill out the characters a little bit more.
Hello, I stand buffer. I'll see you again in 25 years. Meanwhile.
Okay, so we're going to move on to Twin Peaks The Return. Before I pass things on to Rosalie, I'm going to have some explanatory stuff here. So most of the cast from the Twin Peaks show returned for The Return. Now, some of them didn't. I'm going to, just to get it out of the way, I'm going to explain who is the main people who are not in it and why they are not in it. First off, Michael Ontkeen, who played Sheriff Harry S. Truman, is not in The Return. That one is kind of odd because he was retired by the time they started filming The Return. But he initially, when he had the call whether he would come back, he had apparently expressed excitement about doing it, and even asked a prop guy, "Hey, if you can try to find the original coat that I wore, or I think it was a leather coat or something that looks a lot like it, that'd be great." And the prop person did that. But then, I don't know, sometime before filming, they talked to him again, and he had changed his mind. The reason why was never released to the public. I don't know if he even told Lynch and Company, but he sadly turned it down. His character is mentioned a lot in The Return. His explanation for why the character is not in the show is that he is sick with some illness that is never revealed, but it's something serious. His fate with the illness is never revealed, but he is talked to on the phone in various points from a character that Rosalie will explain when I pass it on to her. But he is somewhat present, but he is never actually seen or heard from. The next one is Donna, Laura Flynn Boyle's character. I don't know if Lynch asked her to come back or not, or if she just wasn't even written in because they didn't have anything for her to do, but she did not return. I know something that I will probably reference in the body of the return discussion is Mark Frost wrote, I think he's written a couple companion books for the Twin Peaks universe. The one he did around the time of the return, I think it's called, The Secret History of Twin Peaks or something like that, where he does give certain information about giving a little bit more context to certain stuff you see in the return and to what happened to some of the characters. I know he had said I think I was reading that he explained that Donna had moved away, had cut off from her family and stuff, and then there's a whole thing about her that you can look up and stuff. There's a it's not impossible for that character to ever return, but in that they do kind of explain why she's not present in Twin Peaks in the return. And then obviously Jack Nance had passed away before this could be filmed. Pepper Laurie, that is a very odd one because a lot of these characters, some of these characters, they rather don't need explanations for, or they do explain why they're not present. Pepper Laurie's character, who as far as I can remember was fine at the end of the events of Twin Peaks, the original run, is not mentioned ever in the Twin Peaks: The Return, which I find interesting. But her character of Catherine Martell is not in it. I think Pepper Laurie was very enthusiastic about coming back, but they didn't ask her. Again, there might have been discussions at some point, but I think, again, there just wasn't anything for her character to do. And she was fine with that, and she's fine coming back as that character or doing other stuff with Lynch if something comes up. I think she has a good relationship. There just wasn't anything for her character to do. Eric Del Rey played Leo Johnson. His character was left in a kind of precarious cliffhanger position at the end of the second season. While I pretty much knew he was not going to be in the return, he's also another odd one. They never actually mention his character or what happened to him in the return. I think the only other two characters or actors who are not in, I guess three characters I should say, that are not in the return. One is Annie Blackburn, who was played by Heather Graham. She is mentioned a little bit. Her fate post the return is not mentioned, or post the first two seasons is not mentioned. As far as we know, she's fine, but we never really get to hear what is going on with her. I don't know if Mark Frost explains that in the book or not. And then the last two people who are not in it are probably, for me anyway, the probably biggest, and we'll probably talk about this in the body of it, but the biggest absences that are felt beyond Sheriff Truman. One is Michael J. Anderson, who was the little person who played the man from The Other Place.
Arm.
The Arm,
right?
or The Arm. Basically, the guy who Cooper mainly dealt with in the lodge, who wore the red suit and did the dancing and all that stuff. That is a complicated one. From what I was reading, because I was excited to see him in it, and then when he wasn't appearing, I did look it up while I was kind of in the middle of watching the first two episodes. I don't know if Lynch has ever commented or Frost has ever commented on it, but I guess somebody asked him on his social media, and his version of it was that they had asked him, and then he just said something about them lowballing him, so it almost seems like maybe the price they were offering him was not enough for him or something. But also I think there's some maybe bad blood. Well, one, I don't think he was ever a terribly big fan of the show in general. I think I saw a comment from him that he liked the scenes that he was in, but otherwise he felt the original two seasons of the show was a lot of talking with it not going anywhere. But he did do stuff he had a small part in Mulholland Drive, so he did do stuff with Lynch after that. But I think there was some bad blood because I don't know what the comments are because the article didn't include them just for the sake of not passing on bad rumors and stuff. But he did say some nasty stuff about Lynch and made some claims that made him look kind of bad. Lynch looked kind of bad, but apparently Lynch's daughter denied those things, and there were stuff that I think only he has said. So I don't know. There's some sort of bad blood stuff.
Interesting.
There. He isn't acting anymore, but he was acting, I think, around the time the return was happening. And then the last person who was not in the return, who again is a very big felt absence in my opinion, is Frank Silva, who played Bob in the original series, who died unfortunately very young. He died at 44, going on 45. Back in 1995, I think he died. I think he did pass away from complications from AIDS. There are, as Rosalie I'm sure will explain, there are kind of, or as we might get into in the discussion, but there are kind of substitutions for some of these characters and ways of getting around, especially Frank Silver's absence and Michael J. Anderson's absence. But yeah, I think those are the major people. Oh, and I almost forgot. And Don S. Davis, who played Major Garland Briggs. Again, Don S. Davis had passed away, I think, in 2008. I think we'll talk about some of the other actors as we go on, because there were a lot of deaths in and around the filming of this, of main people. So we'll probably get into that, I think, as we go on. But after that very long explanation, I pass the torch, not reluctantly, to Rosalie, who has the, in my opinion, not enviable task of explaining the gist of Twin Peaks: The Return. So, good luck, Rosalie.
Thank you, Tim. I do have a bit of a daunting task ahead of me, but I think I'm just going to dive in by saying I don't still fully understand everything that I saw. I don't know that I ever will. I don't know that we're intended to, but I did enjoy it. So basically, Twin Peaks: The Return picks up right where we left off in a way, because the previous installments said, see you in 25 years. And
the Laura Palmer doppelganger.
Yeah, Laura Palmer has said this. So it's set 25 years later, but there are some time jumps which make it seem like the time hasn't passed and has passed, but it has passed on the faces of the actors, of course, for the most part, that are here. So if you haven't seen the first 2 seasons, I'm not going to give away like certain key points, but there are things we're going to have to talk about just because they're basic plot details. So that's your warning to go back and watch those now if you haven't done so. So the first thing we have to deal with is Agent Cooper, because we know that the real Dale Cooper, or the good Dale Cooper, is still stuck in the Black Lodge, and his somewhat evil double is out there walking around doing bad stuff. And so that's about where we get started. We do meet the evil Dale, and he has sort of shoulder length black hair, his eyes, I think he was wearing black contacts because his eyes are very dark, and he has an essence about him that is extremely sinister from the very get-go. We also have Kyle MacLachlan playing Cooper back in the Black Lodge, but he doesn't get as much to say at the beginning. He's just sort of hearing these phrases that we've heard before from various people that are also in the Black Lodge and getting messages. And then there is also a third incarnation of Dale Cooper, who we'll get into a little bit later, whose name is Dougie Jones. And I would say he's the most, obviously Evil Dale is a departure, but Dougie is a real departure from either one of them. So we'll talk about that. And yeah, strange things are afoot right from the get-go. So there's an experiment going on in New York City that involves a glass box where a young man is supposed to be watching the box to see if anything appears in it. And he says he hasn't seen anything, but then something does appear, and I won't give away what it is. I don't know if I can give away what it is because I don't fully understand it, but nothing good can come from that. And then we also have basically Evil Cooper is going to be going on a sort of mission to try to get rid of the competition, let's say. And also he's trying to keep from going back into the Black Lodge so that Good Cooper doesn't come out. Mm-hmm. And so that is sort of the setup here. And then we have many locations in this one, not just Twin Peaks, but also we have, and I mentioned New York City, we also have Buckhorn, South Dakota, where there's a murder that ends up implicating Matthew Lillard's character. Matthew Lillard is in this, by the way. I love Matthew Lillard. I wish he was in every episode of it, but he sadly only gets a few moments to shine, but he does a lot with a little. And he is, I will say, somewhat of a pivotal character, even though he's not on screen all that often. There's also some obvious, work on the FBI's part to try to understand why Cooper has been missing for all these years.
Mm-hmm.
And they start to hear that maybe there have been sightings of him, so they start to go look for him. And then there's also some questions about.
I was just say
maybe,
I'll just say, I'm sorry, that that FBI charge is led by Gordon Cole, played by David Lynch, and
of course,
and Albert, played by Miguel Ferrer. So anyway,
correct. Yes, and they are both absolutely fantastic, of course, as always, as we would expect. There are so many guest stars, I hardly know where to start, and I really don't want to give them all away because I think it's really fun to see them as the seasons unfold. You can tell that there's probably just a lot of people out there who loved the original Twin Peaks and jumped at the chance to play even an unspoken, like wordless part in a 5 or 10 second scene. So that's fun. I don't even know where to go from here, honestly, because it's 18 episodes, a lot happens, and a lot doesn't happen.
Well, I will say, just give a little bit more context, so just people know. In terms of Twin Peaks, the people of Twin Peaks, and there's a lot of a lot of our old characters and a lot of new people. Some we see very briefly, some we see a lot more of, and stuff. Essentially, what is going on with them? James is working at the hotel.
The lodge, yep.
What's his face, who owned the hotel, is still running it.
Ben, yeah.
Ben, his brother is up to. He's just basically on drugs the entire movie. Jerry, there's certain stuff going on with Audrey, which we'll definitely get into.
Oh, yeah.
Ed is still running his car repair place. I think they're still married. His wife, Nadine, has a new business where it was a running kind of thing where she's trying to in the original series of her trying to invent silent drapes that open and close silently. She has a business now where I guess she's invented this thing and she's selling them, I suppose. The psychiatrist, played by
Russ Tamblyn.
The psychiatrist from the original series, played by Russ Tamblyn, is, I guess, now mostly living on the outskirts of the town, and he's running kind of this, I would say, very Rush Limbaugh-esque web show, which is I felt very relevant for the time, and also just kind of hilarious because feels like he's very much just doing this to sell his golden shovels.
Exactly.
Peggy Lipton's character Norma is still running her diner. Shelley is still a waitress there. She has a daughter now with a character who I'm actually not going to reveal who her dad is, but I think you can figure out when you watch the show. Then also Bobby Briggs is surprisingly now a deputy at the sheriff's department.
Yeah, he seems to have cleaned up his act a lot.
Yes, and that's kind of surprising. We're talking more about that, I'm sure, as we go on. And then basically the people at the sheriff's office who were there in this series are still there. And to kind of substitute for Harry Truman not being in it, we have his brother. I'm surprised you forgot is mentioning his brother.
I know, I forgot to mention because I love this actor, and he also has now passed away.
Yeah.
But Robert Forster plays Frank Truman, not Harry, but Frank.
And he's kind of the substitution for that not being there. And also Naomi Watts is in this, and some scenes in and around Vegas, who has a son. Also, Dale interacts a lot with them in ways that you will probably discuss and stuff. And I think those are the basics of kind of what the updates of what's going on with them and all that stuff. A lot of stuff is certainly the same. Ed is still pining after Norma, and, there's a lot of stuff that's similar and stuff.
I guess I'll just start with my overall impressions because then we can get into some more specifics. My overall impression was, man, it's great to be back in this world. I love just hearing that familiar music, seeing, slightly updated opening credits images, but still that gorgeous, mountains with some fog coming out, and the overlay of Laura Palmer's face, like everything about it. I was just like, oh, yes, wash over me. I love it. And I also loved the way that he ended most episodes, not every episode, but most episodes, on a musical performance, oftentimes happening at the Roadhouse. So we get to see a lot of really interesting and cool performers. Chromatics, who I love. Sharon Van Etten appears. The Cactus Blossoms, which actually, I believe that's the band that features Lynch's son, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm going down to the sea. M-I-S-S-I-S-S-I-P-P. I watch the sun, yellow and brown, sinking suns in every town.
And then, yes, the Nine Inch Nails, to be specific. They introduce them that way and credit them that way. And Eddie Vedder.
Can climb to heaven on the cross. One liar's promise drained the blood from my heart. Came a message in the dark. Offered the hand of a disembodied man while I still had a chance, but now it's gone, gone. And I am who I am, who I was. I will never be again.
And then the final episode, fittingly, does include a Julie Cruz performance. And again, R.I.P., because Julie Cruz has passed away. So that was another thing that, as I'm watching the show, 5 years removed from when it aired, which was a couple years removed from when they shot some of these, I just kind of had so many moments of that person's gone. And that was a little hard, but it was also in keeping with the show because it is about these transitional moments and these losses and missing people. And so it really, I feel like, had an emotional core to it that wasn't always sustained in the first two seasons. I would say especially season 2, where Lynch was perhaps less hands-on. I think it lost a little bit of that, and it really came back around, I think, in the return, where you kept that, not necessarily like the story following specific beats, but just the emotional essence of what he was trying to get across, I think, was really clear and really moving. What was your overall feeling going back into it?
Well, I will say, before I forget, Lynch is very lucky that he did not wait any longer to do this.
I know.
Because I've already mentioned some people who already passed away long before. I was reading, I think apparently David Bowie, his character from The Fire Walk with Me, is present in certain ways in The Return. Apparently
Yes.
David Bowie was him. There is new dialogue from his character that I don't know if he would have actually appeared on screen or if it was always going to be just voiceover. But there was new dialogue from a different actor who I think is credited. But I think David Bowie was going to return for a small bits and pieces or a small scene or whatever. But I think at the time he was too ill. He died, I think, in January 2016. They filmed this, I think, from September 2015 to April 2016. And I
Yeah.
guess they weren't. He just was too ill. It just passed away before they could get to any of his stuff. And I do. And by the way, they substitute for Michael J. Anderson by his character. The arm is now a tree, which
With a
of course,
weird fleshy blob on it.
yeah, with a weird fleshy blob on it, which is voiced by an uncredited actor who apparently, when asked about it, one of the producers of the show declined to say who it was and said it was best if that remains a mystery. One of the ones that they got very, very lucky on and talking about kind of watching it and kind of feeling certain stuff outside of the context of the show, was Catherine Coulson, who played the log lady,
Yeah.
who obviously had done work with Lynch since back in the Eraserhead days, and who was in the original show and was in Firewalk with Me, the actual final cut of the movie and stuff. She is, so like I said, they started filming in September 2015. She passed away from cancer in September 2015. Well, I'm assuming they filmed all of her stuff at once.
Yeah.
She doesn't have any scenes with anybody else. She just talks to Hawk on the phone a few times in a few episodes, and is significant in the show, but doesn't actually physically interact with anybody. But I think they filmed her stuff that I'm assuming again was filmed all in one day. I think they filmed, I think I read 4 days before she passed away.
Wow.
Yeah, so she obviously is not in good shape, and you can tell.
You can. I was wondering when I first started watching it if they had, made her up that way, but I don't think so. I think
No.
that is how she really probably looked at it and perhaps felt at the time.
Yeah, and
Because her character also
is dying.
is dying.
But they don't, I mean, they don't say what that is, but you can, yeah.
You assume it's probably cancer, right? Because she doesn't have much hair. She's attached to oxygen. She talks about feeling weak. And so, yeah, that really was a gut punch for me. Just
Yeah.
seeing that image, because she's such a crucial character. And just seeing the way that she is treated with such dignity by people like Hawk on the show. Yeah, it's just really moving.
Yeah, it's really, it's nice that she got to kind of finish some stuff up and her character got to be present, especially with a lot of other characters being absent. And it was nice that she got to have one last hurrah with Lynch, because again, she has a long history with him and they have a good relationship, and I think they were both very fond of each other, and it was nice that she was able to do that. I have nothing but respect for her being a trooper, and I'm sure she was in a lot of pain doing those little moments that she had. And it's very obvious that I'm getting teary-eyed just thinking about it. That
Same.
I think it's obvious if you watch it. While it can be hard to watch, just because it's obvious this actress is in actual real life pain and is struggling. You can hear it in her voice. It's obvious that Lynch is treating her with a lot of love and care and a lot of respect and stuff. So it's it's nice to see her character one more time and have her be relevant and to be very crucial. And then Miguel Ferrer died. He had filmed all his stuff for the show, but he did die before the show was released. He died in early mid 2016. So again, very lucky that they got him. He's very important.
Yes, he is.
So it would have been.
It's weird too because he doesn't seem. I mean, he isn't that old, but he doesn't seem like he's old enough to be on the list of potentially, passing away before the show airs.
He had throat cancer.
Oh, okay.
And of course, there's other people that have passed away since then. Well,
I was surprised to see Harry Dean Stanton pop up because I thought he had passed away before the show would have aired. But I guess he passed away in 2017. But he's in it. Probably one of his, final roles as well.
Forster is one of his later roles.
Yep, for sure. And then Peggy Lipton as Norma Jennings. Mm-hmm. I mean, she passed away in 2019. So it's really, like I said, it's sometimes tough to watch this and be like, they're gone. These people were gone before the show came out. Like, it's a little sobering. But I think it's a beautiful tribute to the work that they put together as an ensemble and just, their body of work. It's a really nice, if you have to go out, this is a good thing to go out on.
I do wish there was more mention of Jack Nance's character. There is some footage of him in the movie. I won't reveal the context of it. But again, his character is not really mentioned, except for mentioning the bank incidents. With people who have seen the second season will know what that means. But his character is not specifically mentioned. It would have been nice. And it's sad. His loss, I felt, and it was more subtly felt for me personally, just because I do like Jack Nance. He played possibly my favorite character in the original run. For me personally, the original run of the show Jack Nance was a lot of the heart of that run. He was a big part of that, and his absence for me is felt in that way, where there's a certain, I think the heart of the show is still there to a certain extent, but there's a vital piece missing. And while you can get by with his character not being there in terms of plots and stuff going on, I think there was just, yeah, it's a little, just there's a little sadness that that little thing isn't there anymore. Even if they might not have had, even if he had been alive, maybe they wouldn't have had a use for him anyway. But his character, but it's yeah, his
Oh,
loss.
you know, he would have popped up somewhere. I
Well,
mean, you know,
maybe.
he would have.
Yeah. So yeah, it's that for me is a big thing felt because it just, yeah, I love his character so much from the original one, and I like him as an actor. So
For sure. Well, I'm curious because the show doesn't have Cooper in a role like he was in before. And it
yeah,
doesn't have, you know, Jack Dance's character. Who did you find to be the heart of the show for this version?
that's a good question. Oddly enough, even though I didn't pay as a lot of attention to these, especially one of these characters in the original run, I would actually say two, possibly three characters. I would definitely say the Log Lady, Hawk, and possibly Bobby.
Interesting. I like
Um,
that Bobby made your list.
Possibly, yeah.
I
Uh,
like that. I
yeah.
definitely agree the log lady was high on my list. For me, I'd say for in the town of Twin Peaks, it's definitely Hawk. I've I loved Hawk from the beginning and I still do. And he's aged beautifully, by the way.
Yes, he's
Not
very.
to be
Some of these
super
actors have aged very
superficial, but
well.
oh my gosh. Like some of these people look better now than they did when the show came out. I don't know how that works. But anyway. And then I would also say, interestingly enough, I found that Gordon Cole, the
Oh
FBI deputy
yeah,
director, I really felt that because he's so invested in bringing Cooper home, I feel like he was also really the beating heart. And we do get to see a little bit more of his personal life in little bits. Some of it very humorous, some of it touching, but I really enjoyed Lynch's performance as Gordon Cole, even more so I think this time than previously. We get a little bit more of his humanity. And I did quite enjoy everything involving the Mitchum brothers. They were very fun.
yeah. They one of them. I don't know who one of the actors is, though he looks familiar, so I'm sure I'd recognize the name. But one of them is played by Jim Belushi,
Yes.
because you would totally that would be your first person you go to for a David Lynch project is Jim Belushi.
Right.
uh,
And the other one is Robert Nepper, who people probably know from Prison Break. That's
okay.
the thing he's most known for, but he was also on Heroes, I think, and I forget what else. But on Prison Break, he plays the wonderfully named Theodore Teabag Bagwell.
Okay. So at first it was very odd seeing Jim Belushi in a David Lynch thing, but he actually became to be one of my favorite characters.
100%.
And
Yes.
he's so, I mean, these two characters are these kind of casino running tough guys doing some
They're
illegal
definitely monsters.
mobsters and stuff, but they have that kind of cliched heart of gold thing at the heart of them, and they're, while they could be, especially at the beginning, are really violent and horrible, you kind of see that underneath all this stuff, and obviously it's idealism and stuff, but they actually are kind of very sweet.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted more scenes from them, and it was nice just to keep seeing them. They're, even when I thought, oh, okay, their part's going to be over now by this point in the story. No, they're going to have even more stuff to do. So it was nice to continue to see them. They are partially kind of a part of the comic relief, I think, of this.
Yeah, no, he's absolutely fantastic and, you know, unexpected, but I've seen him be good in other things too. So I'm not surprised that he's good in this. It's just I wasn't expecting to see that face pop up. I also wasn't expecting to see, you know, people like Ethan Suplee or Tom Sizemore or David Koechner, but you know, they all pop up in little ways here in Las Vegas as well.
It should be said, and before I forget, that if you are going into this expecting Twin Peaks, the first two seasons of the show, you might be disappointed. There's
Mhm.
a lot of stuff that's different. Dale, I won't say how much he is actually in Twin Peaks, but it is very little. And again, it's jumping around a lot. But also the tone is very different.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Lynchian comedic stuff in there. There's Lynchian weird stuff and serious stuff. But there was a lot more emphasis, and we'll get more into this, I think, as we get on, but there's a lot more emphasis on horror this time out. And so it's a very different tone, and it's a different structure. And it's just, yeah, it's very different.
Yeah.
If you're expecting more of the same, I think you'll be disappointed. So just know going into it, it is going to be very different. Did
Yeah.
you did you like that fact, or were you kind of like, were you thrown off? Were you kind of like, oh, I kind of wish more of the same, or how'd you feel about that radically different stuff that was in it?
I mean, overall, I will say I liked it. I missed the old Dale, of course, and the one thing that kind of threw me is how many new characters they introduced that
Yes.
aren't necessarily essential. I know that they had to fill in some gaps from people that couldn't return for all the reasons you mentioned earlier, but they have a lot of side characters
Yes.
that you think maybe will be part of the story that maybe they're part of atmosphere, but they're not really essential to the story. So
Yeah.
it's a little less focused in that way. And I'm okay with it on a sense of world building, but I kind of went back and forth on some of it. I was talking to a coworker today about the show, and he said that he loved the original Twin Peaks, and he was really bummed watching the return because it was such a different tone.
What?
So he said he thought it was better when it was on network TV because they had somebody that could sort of edit Lynch's more obscure or Lynchian impulses, I guess. And this, it was like, just do whatever you want. You're on Showtime now. Everybody knows Lynch is great. I don't necessarily agree with that take because I love Lynch and I'm willing to kind of go the distance with him, but I can certainly see why this would alienate some people.
Well, we'll get into. I think there's some thematic reasons why this is very different, and why I think that it works. This being very different from the original run, why I think that works thematically. But that'll be stuff I think we'll save a little bit later in the discussion. But in terms of how I reacted to it, I would say for about the first few episodes or so, it was fine. And then as I was obvious that Dale was not going to be Dale for a long time and stuff, I got a little bit more impatient. And then we had this character, and then we jumped to this character, and then this character, then we see James again for a second, then we don't see him for a long time. Then we see this character we saw from the original run, and then they are absent for a long time. And then we see these new characters, and that's new characters. And then about halfway through, when we have an episode that's called, I don't remember which, it was 8, 9, or 10 or something. No,
I'm sure it's episode 8 you're going to be talking
yeah,
about.
the episode that's also called
Got a Light.
That episode was probably the epitome. That was probably the peak of my frustration, and I was getting very impatient by that point. And it is almost an Eraserhead-esque episode in a lot of ways. And I've thought initially when we first started doing Lynch, I thought I wouldn't like the weird stuff, and I found I really liked the weird stuff, and I liked David Lynch, and I liked the way he did the weird stuff, and I have a lot of tolerance. A lot of people who may not be into that stuff or just not jive with Lynch would be very impatient with some of his weirdness. I am usually very in sync with, even with stuff like Eraserhead or some of the very weird stuff on Mulholland Drive. But I was getting very impatient with some of his Lynchian stuff, and when I was watching that episode, which is for the most part for like 45 minutes of the 55-minute runtime, is very odd. For that God of Light episode, I got very, very impatient and with his weirdness, and I was starting to think that I would not like the return, because I was just like, we're jumping all over the place, we're barely in Twin Peaks, where I didn't know if I was even going to see some of the original characters beyond like cameos, and it was just kind of all over the place. I was getting very, 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 very impatient, and it seemed very indulgent. But I will say, I watched that episode at the end of one night of viewing a bunch of episodes. The next day, when I watched the episode right after that, I don't know if my mood had changed or if it was just at that point of the show, I think episode 9, stuff just started coming together about halfway through, and characters you were starting to see more of. You're starting to see more of the original characters again. Storylines, you were seeing more of their storylines instead of just little scenes, and you're starting to see more of the points of them, and stuff I think just started coming together around that point. And by that point, I started coming around to it, and by the rest of the run, I think I was enjoying the episodes and stuff.
Yeah.
So I did come around to it, but yes, it is. Yeah, I did get very impatient with it, so I can see why some people wouldn't like it, especially that God of Light episode is a lot. how did you? Yeah, I mean, did you struggle with that? And as a follow up to that, and also like how did you feel about that Got a Light episode, which is very Lynch?
That episode, so I was sort of, I mean, full disclosure, I was sort of cramming for the show. I watched this in very quick succession because I had gotten this from the library and I knew we were recording. So I was very back to back to back. And on that token alone, I was like, all right, what are we doing here? Because I just need to get this watched. And I was like, can I just like fast forward? But I didn't. And I'm glad I didn't, because for all of its bizarre imagery, I definitely appreciate just the daring of doing something this experimental and out there. And I do think that I think episode 8 is probably what is sort of telling us the origin of maybe not evil, but the origin of Bob, the origin of a lot of the really bad shit that's going on in Twin
The
Peaks.
origins of the ultimate big bad,
Yeah.
the origins of, which we'll get into, especially, yeah, the origin, not to get specific about it, especially since the show doesn't get specific about it, the origins of Laura, question mark.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a
it's
very pivotal episode. So even though it felt at the time like, what is going on? And it has so many WTF moments, like looking back on it, it is sort of the hinge upon which the series rests. And so I do think it was important. And it reminded me a little bit, of course, of Eraserhead. You definitely called that out. But I also was thinking about like some sequences in 2001: A Space Odyssey,
yes, yes.
some sequences in The Tree of Life, which are
Mhm.
movies that I love. And they were also somewhat difficult to watch the first time around, but then you kind of come to appreciate just the audacity of what the filmmaker's trying to convey that they can't put into a normal narrative arc. So I don't know. I do want to revisit that one.
I
But I can see why it would be difficult for people
Yeah,
to appreciate.
I would say as a whole, be very patient with this season or movie or whatever. It has a very deliberate pacing. It has a very slow pacing. I do think it gets a bit better again halfway through. Be very patient with this episode. If you're watching this with somebody who you think might be a bit hesitant with Lynch, and especially this season of Twin Peaks, just I would give them fair warning about the season as a whole and that particular episode. That might be where you might lose them. So, but I would give them warnings about that. And we will definitely go back to some of the context, the stuff that happens in that episode when we get near the end of this discussion. And again, I will be mentioning more of Mark Frost's companion book that gives a bit more context to that and how it might factor into the rest of the season.
I was thinking that if I was watching the show week by week, I would have been more than a little frustrated to wait a week for the show and then have that episode and not be able to watch anything else right after. But I do think it pays off, and if you're watching them kind of right in a row the way that I did, it's not too bad. Especially because like very shortly after that you get some really interesting episodes.
How did you feel about the absences? Especially, I mean, again, the big ones are Sheriff Truman and the two people from Bob and
Major Briggs.
the arm, and Briggs too,
Yeah.
and Briggs and the arm. I will say for me, the lodge especially feels a bit empty. And I will say the biggest one for me, if I would wish anybody who had not been in it was in it, it would have been the arm, because him not being in it ruins part of the full circle thing they
Yeah.
have within the show as a whole, and within even the season as a whole. There is a circular nature to both the show as a whole and the season that is
Mhm.
somewhat hurt by the fact that you don't have that character
Yeah.
in it. But how do you feel about those absences?
I definitely felt, I would say probably the sheriff the most, although I, again, love Robert Forster and I think he did a great job as Truman.
Yes.
He also adds an interesting dimension because, they have to sort of fill him in on certain details. And so that for me served as a nice little kind of crutch or a reminder of like, oh yeah, that's what happened with that. So it was a nice kind of callback without being super, let's go on this big expositional narrative thing. And I wish the arm guy had been in it for sure. But overall, I think they did a really good job of filling out this world and filling out this cast and really like I said before, I think the cast is like stuffed to the gills.
Yes.
Most of that I found to be good or like not distracting at least. Can I talk about one that I really hated though? The one that I could not stand that felt so self-indulgent and dumb was Michael Cera as
Oh,
Wally Brando Brennan.
okay. Yeah,
I couldn't stand that scene. I was just like, what?
he only has one scene. Yeah, and yeah.
So distracting.
It is. I do like. I didn't like that scene either. I didn't like his character much either. I'm glad he only had one scene. And again, it was
Yeah.
in the middle of this. We have so many characters. Why are we introducing even more? I will say him playing Lucy and why do I keep getting
Andy's.
Andy's son? He is what I would picture their son being like.
Sure.
So I will say they did a good job with characterization of that and just what that character would be like and what he would be doing and all that stuff. But yeah, it wasn't. It was one of those things where I saw somebody describe Twin Peaks partially as being a lot of comedic scenes that go on too long. I don't really feel that's the case with the original run. This with the return, I do feel like there was a lot of sequences where the comedy was going on too long. There's a lot of long takes of stuff that I think was intentional by Lynch that can be very frustrating, like somebody sweeping
The
a floor for like 2 minutes and stuff. But whatever, that's I don't know. I got used to those things. But yeah, some of the comedy did go on too long. And that's a comedic scene that goes on way too long, in my opinion, and wasn't funny, which is mainly what it's supposed to be is funny, and I just didn't find it funny. So I was very impatient with it, and I was just kind of waiting for it to end. My biggest thing that I probably liked about that scene is Robert Forster's reaction to it, where Michael Cera's character, who he's doing this long speech.
I've crisscrossed this great land of ours countless times. I hold the map of it here in my heart, next to the joyful memories of the carefree days I spent as a young boy here in your beautiful town of Twin Peaks. From Alexandria, Virginia, to Stockton, California, I think about Lewis and his friend Clark, the first Caucasians to see this part of the world. Their footsteps have been the highways and byways of my days on the road. My shadow is always with me. Sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, sometimes to the left, sometimes to the right. Except on cloudy days or at night.
And he just goes on and doing all this weird poetic pretentious
and he's
stuff.
Doing it all in a attempted Brando impression that's very, very bad because he was born on like Marlon Brando's birthday, so his middle name is Brando,
and he's dressed like his character from
The Wild One.
Wild Ones and stuff. And but Frank Truman's reaction to this is basically just kind of look at him and be like,
"Yes, well, Wally, it's great to see you again."
That I thought was the funniest part of it.
That was good. Like, you know, his feelings about it were probably similar to ours as viewers. So
yeah,
fair enough. But that definitely could have been shorter. Some of the other storylines I was okay with, even though they weren't for main characters, because I think so. There's a lot going on in the town of Twin Peaks still in terms of drugs being smuggled in terms of, you know, sex work being done that probably involves trafficking of underage girls. There's just a lot of sort of darkness still hanging over the town. And you get the sense that it hasn't really ever quite recovered from what happened 25 years ago. And so I do think some of the things that were going on showed that cyclical nature of, you know, certain patterns being repeated from generation to generation and that kind of corruption that was still going on. I think it served to sort of populate that. And the Roadhouse is just kind of a hotbed for like all kinds of nonsense, you know, from fights to, you know, sexual advances to, you know, it's a place where we just go in and we kind of overhear conversations and little snippets and we don't always know who these people are or what their greater role is, but it's showing kind of how the town just generally is. So I was mostly okay with that.
I would agree and disagree with that, with your assessment, in that I think the town is very much the same in a lot of ways, but I would say it's very different in a lot of ways too, and the characters are very different. I think when we talk more about the thematic elements, I'll get more into that. Before we get into that stuff, I will say, I will ask, oh god, I don't even know if we should even bring this character up. Do we want to bring up the character that is, if you're a Twin Peaks fan, this character appearing would be a big deal? I think you probably know who I'm talking about.
I do. I think we should spoiler alert before we go into that.
Okay, so for people listening to this who have not seen The Return, we're going to talk a bit spoilery stuff that you might not want to know. There's a character reveal that you might not want to know about. I will put in the description of this, wherever you're listening to this or watching this, in the description there will be a time code for this part of the podcast of just the spoilery section of it. If you want to skip it, just go right over it, and we'll try not to mention it later on. That being said, how did we feel about Diane showing up? Because, as I recall, because as I was watching all of her scenes, I remember, and I think this is in the final edit of the first episode that we did on Twin Peaks, you had said that you were hoping that she would never be revealed, and it should be said in the Firewalk with Me, The Missing Pieces, we do get a scene with her, sort of, where Dale is talking to her. She's off in another room, we don't see her, but he is talking to her, we don't hear her voice, so we kind of get another presence of her. But this is a full-on appearance of her. How did you feel about her being in the show and being played by the wonderful and Lynch regular Laura Dern?
Well, first of all, I love Laura Dern, another character or another actor who seemingly doesn't age or ages very well. So in that sense, I was happy to see Diane. On the other hand, her character arc was a little disappointing, if I'm being totally honest. And I see why it went the way that it did, but I kind of prefer her being somebody we don't hear the voice of or see in exchange for being able to kind of project a more wholesome, happy image onto. And that's probably just me being like not a very mature viewer, but I kind of like the fantasy that Diane is safe from all of this, and in this version, we find that she's very much not safe from all of it.
Yeah, I mean, part of me wishes, yes, she'd remained anonymous and off-screen, because again, it is a character you can just project whatever you want, and Lynch is very into projecting what you want onto his stuff, so it is, in a way, surprising. And yes, ultimately how her arc goes and how her arc with another character goes is a bit not as satisfying for me, and I think for you. I think what I enjoyed about seeing her character is her relationship with Dale, in that it's obvious that she has a very long history with him, and if Cole and Albert are going to contact this character for the purposes that they have, she is the person to have it be. I don't know if having a new character this would have worked as well. I think having this character perform the task she was initially asked to do is very appropriate, and it would have felt dishonest, I think, with somebody else. And the scene in question where she interacts with a certain character in prison is very powerful, I think.
Yeah.
And her explanation when she's talking to Cole and Albert about it, well, I think mainly Cole about it later, and giving him a debriefing about it. In my opinion, Laura Dern's acting in that little scene is probably the best act. In my opinion, the best acting of the 18 episodes, of what she is saying about a certain character and what is missing from that character is very, very powerful, and she does a wonderful job. So I think the use of her character in that sense, and just getting to see that scene with Laura Dern and her acting in that scene, make it worth it for me. Yes, I wish they went different ways with her character at certain points, but yeah, I'm half and half with it. I kind of wish they hadn't used her, but I'm kind of glad they had used her, especially if they were going to use a character for that purpose. The only other person I think you maybe could have used this with, though, is a character who didn't have nearly the history with Dale, so it would have, in a way, been bad, but would have had some emotional stakes to it, would have been maybe bringing back Annie.
I thought about Annie. Actually, the one I thought would make some sense would be Audrey, to be honest, but they did something very different with her.
Yeah.
So maybe is this a time to potentially talk about Audrey?
So yeah, there's some odd stuff going on with Audrey. She doesn't appear until near the end of the run of episodes.
Mm-hmm.
She's only in
2 episodes,
I think
maybe
2. Yeah, she's in one when she's
two.
introduced. Then her conclusion, if you can call it that, is in the next at the very
Right.
end of the next one, or after that. And yeah, we don't. And intentionally, I think Mark Frost doesn't even give full context of this in his book. And it should be said that book I keep referencing doesn't give full context to everything. It doesn't explain everything. It just gives you more context to have better theories and a better idea of what's going on. But he refused to give more context about this. Most of her scenes are with her husband, and she's trying to find her lover, I guess, named Bobby.
Billy.
Billy, who we don't get much context of who he is, but he's missing. And some random character at the Roadhouse said that he popped into her house when her and her mom and possibly her uncle were there. And that's how it's phrased, by the way, possibly her uncle. And he was
Yes.
bleeding, and then he ran out again. And we don't really know what the Flying Dutchman was going on with him. But Audrey wants to find him, and she thinks, oh, maybe he'll be at the Roadhouse. And a lot of her stuff is trying to convince her husband to go with her to the Roadhouse to look for him, even though Billy hated the Roadhouse. And at first, it just seems like, oh, she's stuck in a really unhappy marriage, and she wants to find her lover, who she admits she's sleeping with. But as it gets on, at one point, it gets a bit odder, because at one point the husband says, when he gets frustrated with her, it's like,
you're supposed to go to the Roadhouse and see if Billy is there.
I guess. Is it far?
Come on, Audrey. You know where it is. If I didn't know better, I would swear you were on drugs.
Just where is it?
I'm going to take you there. Now, are you going to stop playing games, or do I have to end your story too?
What story is that, Charlie? Is that the story of the little girl who lived down the lane?
Mm-hmm.
which is a bit odd. And then
Yeah, and that story is referenced
like
another time too. That
Yeah.
phrase.
And then they have a scene when they finally get to the Roadhouse where suddenly the announcer is drawing attention to her, and she does a little dance with, I think, the music cue from the original
Yes.
series, which was very cute. And then a fight breaks out, and her dance is interrupted, and all of a sudden we cut to her waking up, I guess, in this white room that we see for like half a second, and she looks in a mirror, and then she says something along the lines of, "What's going on?" or "Where am I?" or something, and then the episode ends.
Yeah.
And that's the last you ever see of her. And she's mentioned a little bit, to give a little bit of context, she was in a coma for a bit after the bank explosion at the end of season 2. Her character is mentioned, though none of the characters outside of her sequences mention exactly what happens to her or what is going on with her. Though we do know she did come out of the coma due to a certain character who we may or may not mention being present in the show. But we don't know what's going on with her. Is this in her head? Is this a dream? Is she in a mental hospital or something? Is she what the F is going on with her? We do not know. How did you feel about that kind of, I mean, odd and very, I think, sad, and in my opinion, her scenes were very hard to watch because they're very cold, they're very abrasive. Her character is very unhappy, and it's just it's hard. I think her scenes are probably the hardest to watch out of all the scenes in the show.
Yeah, she was so lively. Her character's so lively and so like devious in the first 2 seasons.
But I think had hope too.
Yeah, and especially even though her character arc is a little ambiguous at the end of season 2 when the bank blows up, I was so excited when I saw her on screen, and I was like, it's Audrey. And then we find out, we're still in the spoiler alert area, right? We find out that her son Richard is a complete D-bag. Like, that's an understatement.
Yes.
We find out another major detail about him and maybe why he's like that later. And then, she's with this guy, and I'm like, why is this amazing woman with this horrible man? But then, like, she's horrible to him. So I don't know. I wanted so much more for Audrey. So I don't know if I do think we're meant to think maybe she is perhaps in like a mental hospital, and maybe she never recovered fully from either the coma or the other traumatic event that is hinted at, if not explicitly said towards the end here. But yeah, I wanted more for Audrey too.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I do think her story and what is possibly going on with her. Again, there's a lot of themes we're going to talk about near the end of this. I think does kind of go in along with some of the ideas and themes of the overall show. Okay, so to get into some more of the deeper stuff of this, there are a lot of ideas in this,
Yes.
and a lot of stuff in here. They kind of bring it back to some of the points you've already mentioned. Some of this stuff I've read about, I don't necessarily agree with. Some of the stuff I do. One of the things I took note of, was when they're reopening Hawk and some of the other people in the sheriff's office are reopening the Sheriff Palmer case, sort of, because there's some log lady tells Hawk basically there's some stuff that has to do with Dale. Try to find this out, and they go investigating, blah blah blah. But they open up the Laura Palmer case again, get some of the case files out, and at one point there's a photo of her out on the table in the kind of conference room of the sheriff's office, and that's when Bobby is introduced, and he sees the photo, and you hear the Laura Palmer theme and stuff, and he's like, "Oh, Laura Palmer, yeah, that's a memory trip or whatever." Basically, it's a trip down memory lane or whatever he says, and that initially was a bit like odd as a viewer because you would think that it's almost like he forgot about it or he hasn't it's not as a major part of his life anymore, and that you see that in throughout a lot of the characters, and initially was a bit like weird because it was such a big part of the show, Laura Palmer and her presence. But thinking about it and reading about it and seeing the season as a whole, I think that's part of the point, is that while, like you said, the Twin Peaks is kind of very much the same, I would say in some ways it's very different in the fact that it has moved on. I mean, Laura Palmer is not the center of this town's universe anymore. It's not the center of these people's universes, and I think that's very fitting because these things are tragic, and obviously there's always going to be a void left by these people who die in very tragic circumstances, and that stuff is always going to be part of the history of a town, especially a small town. But also, life goes on and stuff, and people grow and people deal with those emotions and they move on the best they can and they go on to other things and stuff. And I think one of the themes of the show in a fictional context and in a meta context is that you shouldn't live in the past. And these characters are mostly not living in the past. And one of the problems with Dale, especially near the end, which again, we'll get to that, is that he is, in a way, still living in the past. And he hasn't, understandably, because he's been kind of in a limbo state, almost literally, for 25 years. He hasn't moved on. And Laura Palmer still very much is the center of his universe, even when she shouldn't be, and that causes problems. And I think that's maybe one reason why it's good that the show is very different structurally and tonally from the original run, is that the show has moved on too. It's not going to be exactly like it was originally. Obviously, the actors have changed, Lynch has changed, Frost has changed, and it almost seems like a meta comment to the fans of this is going to be changing, but that can be okay too. Let's not just live in the bubble of this is what the original show was like. Let's just keep having it be like that. Like, things still have to evolve and things have to move on. So that would be the first theme of the many themes of this that I would bring up. Did you... Again, I was reading a lot about this and was thinking a lot about it. Is that something you picked up on at all? Would you agree or disagree with that? Or
yeah, I think I would agree with that. That seems to be a theme that has come out. One of the things that I think really struck me watching it as an overall theme was this idea of doubling and, like, multiple appearances of people, but they're really not themselves. And we talked about how characters like Bobby, for example, have really changed, since the original incarnation of the show. And I think in the real world, like outside of the show, I think people do sometimes change over the course of their lives and other people don't. And maybe that's a choice that they have. But what I found interesting, and if you kind of look into, because the term tulpa comes up to talk about the doubles, they talk about the tulpa of Cooper or the tulpa of another character. And that comes from, I guess, like Tibetan, from my understanding, a very limited understanding, I should say, of like Tibetan and mysticism. And it's basically like a spirit that can kind of develop its own sentience, but it comes out of the original person. So like you almost will them into an existence. And so to me, the show has always been somewhat about dealing with trauma and the ways in which we deal with trauma. And I realize that can be a tired concept. There's a lot of movies that people are like, that's their shorthand to it is like, oh, this is a thing about trauma. But what I really mean is like, the town has gone through something difficult. Laura's family went through something difficult. Laura herself, clearly Cooper has had these losses. And so the ways that people deal with that, it might be through, turning their life around career-wise or seeking out spirituality, or maybe they seek out, nature. But this tulpa thing is another way that people are sort of dealing with something that's happened to them that they can't really process. So I don't know if that's something that you have looked into at all. It certainly is fascinating, and I kind of want to delve into it more, but I wonder if that was something that Lynch has always thought about when he thought about the show, or if he sort of brought that in just for the return.
Well, I do know they were going to breed in more doubles as a possible storyline for season 3. That was a idea of having basically, I think, almost a Body Snatchers, Invasion of the Body Snatchers season where more evil copies pop up and stuff. I don't know if it would have had that same thematic element, but you certainly see that stuff in other stuff that he's done, like Mulholland Drive.
Sure.
I think in, I haven't seen it, but in the last movie he, as of right now, has done, Inland Empire, I think there's elements of that. So yeah, there's certainly a double thing or a double life and stuff going on, which is interesting for him. It certainly is, I think, something that he's interested in, and I guess Frost is interested in as well. And I certainly don't want to underscore Frost's opinion. This is his baby too. It's not just David
Right,
Lynch.
Of course. This movie, or I keep calling it a movie. I still don't know how I feel about it being a movie, but this series, it does delve into the philosophical or spiritual or metaphysical aspects, I think, a bit more for sustained periods, unlike, the previous show, which would just do it in little bursts. So I'm curious how much of that you felt was helpful or necessary, or did it just kind of end up being like running circles around a rabbit hole? Because for me, I don't still feel like I totally understand some of the concepts that they talked about. I, of course, am willing to see it a couple more times and see if it makes more sense. But some of it felt like it's kind of a stand-in for, we can't really explain what this is, but we're going to try to like layer a narrative story over these heady concepts.
Okay, so to answer that question, I think we're gonna have to talk about the ending. Now, how this is going to work for people who are listening, we discussed this beforehand. We're going to first talk about the ending in as vaguest term, the most vague terms that we can, and then kind of like we did with the other section a little bit earlier in the episode, we'll have a little spoiler section. Again, it'll be marked in the description with time code, so you know from this point to that point, what you can skip if you don't want to hear about the ending, because we will get specifics about the ending and what it means and doesn't mean, or maybe our ideas specifically about it. But to answer your question by talking as vaguely as I can about the ending. In my opinion, the last episode and a half, especially the last episode, and I would even say the last 3 to 5 minutes of Twin Peaks: The Return at the last episode, is probably the most densely, in my opinion, the most densely packed bit of fiction I've ever seen in terms of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
There is so much thrown in, again, especially in this last few minutes, there is so much thrown in. It is actually kind of extraordinary that Frost and Lynch manage it in a writing, directing fashion. There are possible ideas of time travel, of alternate histories, alternate realities. What is reality? Dreams within dreams. Coop playing God when maybe he shouldn't. Who has the right to change tragedies into successes? Identity. Who are we? Who are we in other people's heads? Ideas of you can't change the past without changing people and the world and who they are. Of idea of the big bad and her possible connection with a person very directly linked to Laura Palmer. A slight spoilery thing, Coop and Diane's final scene, and what it has to do with that big bad, what it has to do with Bob, what it has to do with that Got a Light episode. And yeah, there was a lot packed in to that final stuff there. I will say, without giving the ending away, it is a very haunting ending, very much so. And you see the flaws of Dale, and again, maybe in a meta context, maybe Dale, in the eyes of the characters and the eyes of the audience, is not as perfect as nostalgia would lead us to believe. But in vague terms, what is your response to that, and what is your kind of ideas and responses to the ending?
Well, I was really happy with the way things were playing out in part 17. I would say, even so, this is where we're going to get a little bit spoilery probably, but the line where he says, "I'll see you at the final curtain," to me, that actually would have been, I guess maybe I'm being more traditional here, but that would have been an all right ending to the series for me if he had just ended it on that line. Some things wouldn't have been resolved, but look, I mean, Lynch leaves things unresolved all the time, so I would have been okay with that. It goes further, and you're right, there's so much going on, and I do admire, again, the audacity. Like, to me, part 18 is also as challenging, if not more so, than part 8, not because it's doing all this experimental stuff like part 8 was, but it is reframing a lot of things we think we know and a lot of people we think we know. And so in some ways, Frost and Lynch are taking a really big chance by essentially letting us see a very different version of some of the things that we thought were established in the show's canon. And like I alluded to earlier, that particular scene of the last scene with Cooper and Diane is still one that I probably will be haunted by. They have some really great moments together, but then it feels like all of that gets undercut.
Yeah. Okay. So to get into, I think we should switch. Okay, to switch into the spoilery stuff. So this is your warning. If you have not seen this and you don't care about getting spoiled, to give some context, the day is saved. Evil Dale is gotten rid of, and everything seems good. But good Dale knows that something is still wrong. And there's still some stuff he wants to do. We don't always get quite an idea of what's going on, but it involves Diane. Him and Diane are going to go on a mission with the help of the Lodge, and it's kind of unclear exactly how much they know that does happen, because there is some alternate reality, alternate timeline stuff possibly, and they do talk about how they kiss one more time before they enter this. They time jump, or at least space jump, or whatever, and we don't know if they know that. They don't know how much stuff is going to change and how they might change as people. There does seem to be some hint of they know some stuff might go wrong. So they want to have one final moment before that happens. But they do have, when they finally do that jump, they go to a hotel. They have, I think it is an intentionally very awkward sex scene. Yeah, I mean, seeing her and like that and just kind of go off camera, it is sad, and you would think she would maybe come back, but maybe, again, I don't know, Lynch subverts expectations all the time. I mean,
He does, yeah.
I mean, characters are oft in very non-ceremonious ways. I mean, Evil Dale is just shot. He doesn't get a final stand, really. He's just shot. The asshole character that he interacts with,
who's a total Chad, by the way,
just dies.
Yeah.
He doesn't give a big final thing. He doesn't interact with other characters. There's not a big final thing where a good character finally lets him have it or something. He just dies. So Lynch, subverts stuff all the time. So I'm kind of not surprised that Diane maybe went out that way, even though I'm sad that she did. But in terms of the ending, where Dale takes, well, not Laura Palmer, but Cheryl Lee's character, who I'm getting her...
Carrie.
Her character back to Twin Peaks to see if it'll jog some memories and stuff. And he has an alternate identity by that point of Richard. That scene, which when they visit Laura's house and Laura's mom, Sarah, is not there, another woman is there who's talking to somebody we don't see off camera, who's also in the house, is such a good scene. It is, I don't know if I fully like it or like the ending, but it is again densely packed with ideas. It is one of the most unsettling things I have ever seen. Especially with some of the ideas that I'll mention after we give our opinions about what we think the ending is without extra information. And it ends. Well, how did we, with a scream and some lights going out,
Yeah.
how did you feel about the specific ending and it ending the way it did, especially with not a cliffhanger, but it leaves you with a lot of questions? How did you feel about that? And what do you think the ending means? What do you think is happening in it?
Well, the very first thing I thought of was It's a Wonderful Life, where the angel is taking Jimmy Stewart's character around to show him what his town would have been like had he never been born. And he goes to his house and he goes to try to find Mary, and nothing is as it should be. And that's what immediately came to mind here. And then hearing that scream, which I assume is supposed to be an echo of, Sarah Palmer, Laura's mother, it tells me that they haven't successly gotten rid of whatever has possessed
The
either
Judy.
Laura or, yeah, I mean, this Judy. I don't know. Is it tied to Laura? They say in a previous episode, Laura is the one. So is Laura the embodiment of this, and she's unable to escape it in any universe? I mean, even the version of her as Carrie seems to be in a pretty dire position when Richard finds her. So yeah, it definitely is unsettling. I was not so much confused as just gut punched, because after all that Dale has been through, he's failed again, or so it seems, right? Like what he wants to see as the conclusion to Laura's story isn't going to happen.
Yeah, it's a perfect. Yeah, it's him playing God and him not realizing maybe the effects of that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of butterfly effect stuff going in there, which is also mentioned by Jeff Goldblum to Laura Dern in Jurassic Park. If you want
That's true. That is true.
And I will say this: there's obviously a lot of theories about this, and to bring it back to Mark Frost's book, companion book, he does give more context to this, and I've seen other theories that bring context to this that makes sense to me. And obviously, there's tons of answers you could give to this. Part of the answers to this could lie into things that we see in this show, which is something Coop brings up earlier in the show, which is dreams within dreams, and also another thing that could possibly make sense of it. It could be part of a theory. Is a line we see throughout the original run. We see it in Twin Peaks Firewalk with Me. We see it in Twin Peaks The Missing Pieces even. We see it in the beginning and the end of Twin Peaks The Return, which is the often said line by the arm and by the guy who's missing an arm. Is it future or is it past?
Yeah.
But to bring it back to the God of Light episode, even though I don't think they ever say their names, even though people seem to be very adamant that this character is who they are, the little girl in that is suggested, or maybe even in Mark Frost's book or something, is said to be Sarah Palmer.
Mm-hmm.
And that insect going into her mouth is suggested to possibly be Judy.
Mm-hmm.
And Judy is suggested possibly to be the mother to all these Lodge characters. I saw one theory that suggested that actually the ending might be a happy ending. Maybe a happy ending wrapped in a horror context, in a Lynch context, but a happy ending, in that the woman who answers the door to the house, who I think actually was a woman who recently had bought the real life house that was used for
that's
filming.
cool.
And I think Lynch just used her. She wasn't the one who had it. I think the person who had it before her lived there for like 48 years. So she hadn't been there for very long. She's talking to somebody off camera in the house we don't see. We hear maybe some whisperings, but we don't see them. And it's a kind of a callback to earlier when Hawk visits Sarah and we hear a noise in the house. And he asks, was there somebody else in there? And she says no. And it's suggested that maybe the person that woman is talking to is not her husband, as it is said, but is possibly Sarah Palmer / Judy, and this is a fake reality that she has constructed. And partially what people would think that is because the name that the woman has and the name that she gives to the person who owned the house before her are both names that the old woman from the Lodge used in the original series, which Dale, I think, was aware of at one point. But maybe he's not.
That's right. The lady with the creamed corn, right?
Yeah, and Dale suggested maybe Dale wasn't realizing this because he's slowly turning into the Richard persona. And those two names being there reveal that it is just a very loose reality construct by Judy. And Cheryl Lee's alternate doppelganger character at the end is finally remembering who the Laura past, and that horror of that is releasing that, and maybe the giant and the woman from that Got a Light episode were using her as a force of good, because maybe they are the White Lodge. Maybe the giant is the White Lodge, and at least that's my theory anyway. And they were using it as a force for good to get rid of Judy. And her final screaming realization is a kind of powerful force that is destroying this false reality that Judy has created, and that's why the lights go out, and the kind of universe is maybe being gotten away. Now, whether Laura and Coop survive that and get back to their reality, or they die with it, I don't know. But they see it as a happy ending of they do actually defeat this evil Judy, which is kind of one of the points, sort of that season. And that the whole Coop and Diane have sex thing was because during that sequence, a song plays that is played in the Got a Light episode, and it's suggested. I've seen the theory suggested that they're having sex, because if you notice in the New York sequence, the guy and the girl have sex, and then Judy.
And then
They've suggested that creature that pops up is Judy, and that she pops up, and that sex partially brings her on. And somebody even brought up that something to do with Judy is brought about by fire or by something, and that while you have sex, there's friction.
Okay.
And that might bring her about. But then, so to bring about Judy, so that they can confront her, defeat her, do whatever, Coop and Diane have sex. And that might bring about the 1956 of the Got a Light guy and the bums coming to town. And that might bring in Judy going into Cheryl's mouth. And that starts off the whole thing. And then that allows Coop to then go and meet Judy. So
wow.
Those are the theories I've read, and those are
That's
some of that. Yeah, some of that stuff is suggested in Mark Frost's book. Some of it is fan theories. Some of it is my theories. So there's a mixture of stuff. Again, Mark Frost's books does give more context to some of this. It does not give full answers. He doesn't say this is what is happening at the end, but it gives you some information that you can maybe make maybe a better guess of what you think happened. But yeah, I mean, I think I like the theory. I probably believe it. That will probably be my theory of what happened. And again, I do like the idea of a happy ending wrapped up in Lynchian horror. Yeah, but how do you feel about that idea with a lot of moving parts?
Wow. I mean, I've only been sitting with the finale since like 1 a.m. Last night, so less than 24 hours ago. And so it's going to take me a while, I think, to fully process even what I thought of it. But I do like that interpretation. And the theme of electricity kind of
electricity.
Often.
There we go. Yeah, that's what it was. Electricity. She comes about through electricity and this friction. And yeah.
So I did think that the lights going out was part of like signifying something to do with that electricity, whether it was good or bad. But the main thing that I was gathering from the finale in terms of like the theory part was when they showed Judy but when they were explaining Judy and they showed the symbol, and then it goes from being an 8 to like an infinity symbol, and there's a little like bead that's floating around in there. And to me, that was sort of talking about like the inscrutable nature of Judy, but like more succinctly, I guess, the forces of good or evil, where they're infinite. So it is hard to like pin it down to one specific time or person or place. Maybe that's why they've had so much trouble kind of tackling this task. But I think what I originally got out of the ending watching it last night is that maybe everybody else has mostly moved on from Laura Palmer, but I don't know if Cooper has, and I don't know if he ever will. And in that way, he is perhaps permanently in the Black Lodge.
Yeah, and there's some suggestion that maybe he never left the Black Lodge at all. Maybe him and Laura are just kind of stuck in this terrible loop. Or maybe he ruined Laura's happy ending at the end of Firewalk with Me and pulled her out of her angels and into her harsher world. And
yeah, it's definitely one I'm going to be going back to. It's definitely one I'm going to be pondering for a long time. And I am definitely going to pick up that book. Like, that is seeming more and more essential. The last time I was this intrigued by a show's mythology was Lost, and I really scrutinized that show, and sometimes it was rewarding and sometimes it wasn't, but I think this will have even more to scrutinize, and perhaps more dead ends, but I also feel like it's a more complete artistic vision. So yeah, I'm I'm really happy we had the chance to watch this, even if I don't know how to fully process it.
To wrap things up, what is your overall feeling about the show now that we've seen, as so far anyway, all of it?
I think it's become one of my favorite TV shows for all the flaws that I think especially season 2 ended up having. Just the overall arc, the overall world, these characters, and the level of just visual artistry too, and the sound design, which of course was done by Lynch himself. Everything is just so beautiful, even the troubling parts. So yeah, I really loved it. I found that all the hype over the years did not dilute it at all for me. It made it maybe even that much better, because I, in my head, was like, there's no way it could possibly live up to hype. For me, it definitely did. So yeah, I'm really happy I watched it. It means a lot to me, and I can see myself coming back to it over the years.
Before we wrap up, as this is coming out, this is going to be at the tail end of the November Criterion Barnes & Noble 50% off sale. Rosalie has told me off mic that she did not get anything for it because she is a responsible adult, unlike me. But I just got a few things. I was going to get more because I have had a little bit more money. I didn't get a job that I wanted, but I did have a bit more money from the current job I had, so I was going to go a bit more crazy. But I am probably going to go to the TCM Film Festival this year, well, not this year, but in April.
Exciting.
So that's going to be expensive.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to conserve money as I can. So I only got a few things. I got The Circus and The Great Dictator, both from Charlie Chaplin. I hadn't bought any Chaplin stuff for a while, but I got that. I don't know actually how to properly pronounce this, but Tampopo?
Tampopo?
Yeah.
I've been wanting to watch that. I haven't seen it yet.
Which was the second feature film of a director I just recently became familiar with. This was the first film they released of his, of Japanese director Juzo Otami. Just recently they released his first feature film, The Funeral. But the fourth thing I got, just because I've heard really good things about it, and to bring it back sort of to David Lynch, or at the very least Harry Dean Stanton, I did buy Paris, Texas.
Nice.
Which I have not seen.
Me neither.
But I've heard very good things about it. And is there anything that's coming up that's going to be releasing that you would like to highlight?
Yeah, there's two things I'll talk about. So one of them, I don't know if this counts as a boutique label, but I'm calling it that anyways. I don't care. I do what I want. It's Paramount Home Media, so they're not that obscure, but they're releasing Stanley Tucci and Campbell Scott's movie Big Night on Blu-ray, and that is coming out on January 31st. I saw this movie early this year, and it was so enjoyable. It's about these two brothers who are from Italy, and they've opened a restaurant, an Italian restaurant in New Jersey. It's not doing super well, and they're kind of in conflict of, like, one wants to stay very true to the recipes that they know and love and are, like, more authentic, and the other brother is like, no, we got to get more customers in the door, like, let's do what we got to do here. And it's a beautiful, funny, enjoyable movie with a big cast that includes Minnie Driver and Ian Holm and Tony Shalhoub and Isabella Rossellini and several other people that I was excited to see pop up. So this one is one I'm excited to have on Blu-ray. And if you like food, don't watch this on an empty stomach, because it is hungry. I immediately wanted to go to an Italian restaurant where I watched it. So the other one I'll talk about briefly is from Kino. And so this one is the Francois Truffaut collection that they've announced. And it is coming out on Valentine's Day. And it is 4 movies of his from the 70s. So we've got The Wild Child, Small Change, The Man Who Loved Women, and The Green Room. And I have not seen any of these, but I've enjoyed the Truffaut I have seen so far. So I'm excited to get this 2-disc set.
Well, to just kind of give a preview for what's coming up, we're going to take such a radically different turn for December that you're going to get whiplash. We're going to talk about 2 films of Bing Crosby's where he plays the same character, Going My Way and The Bells of St. Mary's, to kind of give you some feel-goodness during the holiday season. And then in January, we're going to continue our look at the films of the Japanese director Ozu, with some more of his silent films. We'll mention the specific films, I think, next month. And then for February, as always, we'll try to do something for Black History Month. If we can't manage it, then we'll figure out a different topic, which we'll obviously announce when we get to that point. But until that point, you can, if it still exists by the time this comes out, you can find me on Twitter at Cinema Pack, where you can find links to my YouTube channel.
And you can find me on Twitter at Rosalie Lewis. And I also write for fthismovie.com. And I have a couple of podcast appearances on places other than this one. So keep an eye out for the Film Feast podcast as well as Cult Movies.
And of course, you can find our parent site, as of right now anyway, at 25 Wild Media. But get ready for some feel goodness with Bing Crosby. Very looking forward to that. And maybe get nuzzled up in the covers and get ready for us to talk about Going My Way and the Bells of St. Mary's in December. We will see you then.